We're going to start with Unit 1A, Points, Lines, and Planes. We're going to do the first flap of the foldable today. It's all just vocabulary words. So go to where it's purple on top and green on bottom. We're going to start with the purple on top first. Our first word that we need to know what it is called a point. And I know that y'all have used points in Algebra 2 with the coordinate system, and a point is just represented by a dot, but a point is not actually a dot. You can't see a point, it's a location. So you know whenever you use GPS and it tells you your location, that is what a point is. You can't actually see it. You can go to that location, but you can't see the location itself. It is just represented by a dot. And whenever we look at points on a picture, we're going to use the picture down here in the green part. Points are all these dots. So we have point A, B, C, D, E, and F. Those are all of my points. And we just list them as the letters. So A, B, C, D, E, and F. A line is an object with no thickness that extends infinitely in both directions. So a line, you also cannot see it because it has no thickness. So if you turn your paper sideways, you can kind of see a line, but that's because paper has a thickness. We can write on it. A line has no thickness. You cannot see it. I know this is hard to understand, but lines are, if you're looking from one person into another person's eyes, you're making a line by looking at their eyes, but you cannot see that line that's between your eyes and their eyes. So kind of think about it like that. Whenever we see lines, they do have a straight line with arrows at both ends. So in our picture below, we have a line. There are several ways to name this line. We can name the line, this is our line right here. We can name it AD, we can name it AC, we can name it CD, or you can flip those letters and name it the opposite way. So you can name it DA, DC, or CA. You can name it any of those ways as long as you represent two letters to name a line. It takes two letters to name a line. So we have AD. And whenever you write a line, you can't just put the two letters to show that it is a line specifically. It has to have a line on top with arrows at both ends. If you do not label this correctly, it will be points off on a test. You have to be able to label it and tell me it is a line. So AD, there's also line AC, and line CD. And again, you can always name them with the letters going the other way. So it can be DA, CA, or DC. That does not matter with lines. Okay, a line segment. A piece of a line consisting of two endpoints and all points in between. So line segments have a beginning and an end. They do not go on forever and ever and ever the way that lines do. That's why we have arrows on lines. They go on forever and ever. Line segments do not. They have a starting point and an ending point. So one line segment is AD. It starts at A and ends at D, or vice versa, starts at D and ends at A. There's also AC or CA. And there's also CD or DC. You can name it any one of those ways, but they are definitely separate line segments. As you saw, whenever I highlighted them, they gave you different sizes and lengths. So we have AD, and a line segment is named by just a line on top. We have AC with a line on top and CD with a line on top. And of course, they look like a straight line with points at the two ends. It has a starting point and an ending point. And don't forget, line segments can be named backwards as well. So it could be DA, CA, or DC. A ray is a point of line, a piece of line with one endpoint extending indefinitely in one direction. So it has a starting point, but then it will go on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And it doesn't necessarily have to be pointing to the right or any specific direction. It could be pointing in any direction, but it has a starting point and it goes on forever and ever. So whenever we look at our picture, our rays are as follows, and yes, the letters have to be written this way because you have to start at the starting point. So if we start at A, our ray, if it goes in this direction, can be called AC or AD. We also have ray CD. And you cannot just call this ray D. It has to go through another point. So CD is the last one. So there is AD, AC, and CD going in this direction. Then we could also go up. If it starts at D, it can be called DA or DC. If it starts at C, it can be called CA. And that's the only way if it starts at C. So there are 6 possible ways to name this. AD. And whenever you name it, the ray has to look like a segment on the left, but a line on the right. And you always name it. That tells you that it starts at A and it ends at D. You could not do it this way. This is completely wrong. You cannot name it that way. It has to be done this way if you mean AD. So AD, AC, I'm going to take that off. Or CD, and that's if it's going down. If we're looking at it upways, DA. And you notice how my arrow is different on this one? Because now before I had showed you, you cannot name this DA with the arrow pointing the other direction. You have, if you're going to name it, it has to be pointing it always has to point to the right. And in this case, we're talking about the arrow that went down. In this case, we're talking about an arrow that goes up. So that's DA. There's also DC and CA. Opposite rays are 2 rays sharing the same endpoint and continuing infinitely in opposite directions. Opposite rays, there will always be a list of 2 rays because, of course, they're opposite. So you always have to write it as 2 rays. So if we talk about C being the common endpoint of 2 rays, there is the ray CA, and that goes that way forever and ever. And then there is the ray CD. So those are my 2 rays. That is the only way that I can make opposite rays out of this line. So that was CA and CD. And on opposite rays, the first letter will always be the same for both rays. It has to be. Because remember, they have to have a common endpoint. They have to share that endpoint. So rays also always have a dot in the middle. And one ray will go in one direction, the other one will go in the opposite direction. So they will always look like a line. A plane, whenever we represent it, it looks kind of like a rhombus most of the time because it is a flat surface, but it goes in infinitely in all directions. So if you think about your desktop, it can represent a plane, but it's not actually a plane. It would be a desktop that never ever ends, and it's forever ever long, and you can never see the end of it. It's the same thing with lines. Whenever we draw arrows, you see how we put arrows at the end of lines? That means that it goes on forever and ever in that direction. Planes will go on forever and ever in all directions. We just don't have a way to draw that because we would never have a piece of paper big enough. So we represent it as a rhombus looking thing. But just keep in mind that planes do go on forever and ever. In our picture, our planes are represented with cursive letters, or you can name them with 3 points on that plane. So when we're talking about this plane G, it can be, of course, G. But then the 3 points that are on the plane are C, D, and E. So we can name it with a cursive G or plain C, D, E, and you always have to use 3 points. So it can be G or C, D, E. The other plane is H. And it can also be named CDB. So plane H or CDB. And these letters don't have to go in any specific order. Typically they go in alphabetical order, so I didn't name this last one right. It would be BCD. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. I would take it either way. The letters really don't have to be in any specific order. So those are our planes. Collinear are points that lie on the same line. So whenever we look at our line, our points that are on our line are A, C, and D. So our collinear points are A, C, and D. And you only need 2. So you could say collinear points are A and C, collinear points are C and D, collinear points are A and D, whichever. But those 3 are the ones that are collinear in our picture. But you only technically need 2 points. Non-collinear are points that do not lie on the same line. So again, if this is our line, if I chose points C and B, they're not collinear. If I chose points A and E, they're not collinear. There are so many letter combinations that I'm not going to be able to write them all, but you can write them however you want. So C and B, A and E. Come up with a couple of your own. Coplanar means that points that lie on the same line. So if we're talking about plane G, and there are always 3 points with planes, so our coplanar points are C, D, and E. There is also another plane, which is H, and our coplanar points with H are C, D, and B. So those are your only 2 possible answers as far as coplanar points. Non-coplanar points are points that are not on the same plane. So if we use plane H, you would pick any 3 points, but one or 2 of them would not lie on the same plane. So if I chose C, I could also choose A and E. Those are not coplanar because they are not on my yellow plane. So I could also choose C, D, and E, and they're still not coplanar because E is not on our plane. So again, there are many, many different combinations you can have for this answer. Just know that at least one of them has to not be on the same plane as the other 2, or 2 of them cannot be on the same plane as the 1. And that is it for today. Make sure to come to class with any questions or comments over this portion of our notes. I will see you tomorrow.